a few words on the work that we've done in Surrey under this sort of loose title of Retrofit, Surrey Retrofit Skills Partnership. So we've been, as I said, we've only been really operating or sort of operating in this way since the autumn, so since about October, and really driven by the fact that there was some Department for Energy Security and Net Zero funding available for this kind of retrofit skills pilot model. I work at Surrey County Council, and I sort of initiated, saw this opportunity for this funding, and very much recognised that retrofit is, the same as Sharon and Ash have outlined in the Northeast. Retrofit was kind of a key part of our sort of net zero transition, but also was going to be a key sort of economic opportunity. So I sort of initiated the work and sort of brought together, as it says there, 2 colleges and 1 training provider to explore kind of how we could work together, both on the bid, but also more generally. As it says on the slide there, this is very much an informal partnership at the moment. So there's sort of no legal entity or joint venture, sort of no formal sort of service level agreements or anything between the colleges. At the moment, what we have is some DESNES funding that allows us to commission some free training on behalf of local businesses, but nothing more formal than that. But I think that's that there's definitely questions that we should think about, particularly picking up on what was said just now about sort of what the sort of nature of the partnership is. As it says at the bottom there, the funding was confirmed towards the DESNES funding was confirmed towards the back end of 2023, and allowed the development of and some of the activities that I'll talk about now. But I think actually, as is often the case with these things, that was sort of the catalyst, as I said at the beginning, for encouraging the colleges and training providers to kind of work together. And although it's sort of 2 colleges and 1 training provider that are sort of formally involved, there's at least 2 or 3 others that that we're looking to work with around things like some staff training and some of the facilities and equipment side of things as well. In terms of kind of what we've done, I think the first thing to say is that we commissioned what we've called the Retrofit Skills Roadmap, which was, as you can see at the bottom there, was undertaken by a consultancy called GemServe in the spring, sort of February, March time this year. And that very much, I guess, was looking at kind of both the number of measures that were required to deliver our net zero targets, but then obviously from the skills perspective, the workforce required to deliver against those. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. I think picking up on the sort of amazing work that they've done in the Northeast around the kind of skills and employer side, I think it's probably fair to say that we've taken a little bit more of a sort of top-down approach here. So we've kind of looked at actually what are the total measures that are needed, and that shows, and I think I've got it on the next slide, but that shows we've got nearly 1 million individual retrofit measures needed across the county, and it's sort of something like £9 billion worth of kind of work that's needed to do to meet those. And I think key to that really was that allowed us to kind of make the case to both businesses and colleges and training providers to say, look, this is a growing market. It's key to net zero. It's key to our sort of economic, it's key to the kind of economic opportunity in the county. And I think what we didn't do as much of is that sort of engagement with employers to sort of understand from them about kind of what their current sort of short-term skills needs and skills gaps are. I think, having said all of that, in the development of the roadmap and landing on some of those numbers, we did definitely look at the sort of EPCs and the other sources of data and sort of archetypes of types of properties to look at kind of where measures were needed. We looked at the existing retrofit provision, obviously key to kind of understanding what the kind of skills gaps were. Engaged with the colleges to understand what their current offer was, what their barriers to scaling that up might look like, any thinking that they had on new courses that they might want to put on. We did do some engagement and consultation with businesses on their sort of current and expected skills needs, and similarly, and not on this slide, around our skills bootcamp offer, which is what we've got in place for the next 12 months. We probably engaged with about 4 or 5 businesses to kind of design and spec out the requirements for those skills bootcamps. But yes, the sort of engagement with consultation with businesses around the roadmap, and then around the kind of course content for the skills boot camps is probably the extent of our kind of engagement with businesses so far. And then, yeah, very much looked at kind of best practice from elsewhere. And I guess going back to my point at the beginning, that it's fantastic to have this opportunity, or for Ashton to do this work, kind of sharing best practice. It would have been amazing if this had been in place 2 years ago when I sort of first started in this role, or maybe it kind of wasn't as sort of as well known, the fact that there was all of this work that had been done in other regions. But we spoke to, I think, Liverpool City region, Greater Manchester, and a couple of others who were already doing some stuff. And similarly, GemServe spoke to I think to the original GCAP work in the southwest, led by Exeter College, I think. So kind of trying to speed up our own learning as we develop the sort of the plan. So I've already talked to some of this already, but yeah, the sort of headline, nearly a million measures, about 3,000 retrofit roles at its peak in the middle of 2030. And then some sort of highlight numbers for kind of how many retrofit professionals are going to be needed. And I think the challenge with all of this is that this is a sort of a market that's not yet quite here. And I think it's very much the case that employers are, retrofit businesses are probably mainly working on publicly funded retrofit. They're not really doing a huge amount of their work in the sort of able to pay kind of private residential houses or commercial landlords or commercial businesses yet. So I guess it's kind of trying to build that case for what the demand is going to be in a very short order, and try to get the colleges and training providers sort of ready to meet that in the next few years. And similarly, I'm sure these stats will be similar sorts of things across the country, but particular skills shortages in our patch for heat pump engineers, and that was about like as much as 3/4 of the skills gaps. And then solid wall insulation installers is probably a function of the property types of the region and the retrofit assessors and coordinators as you'd expect. So this is a sort of very high level view of the recommendations. And I think the sort of two big boxes at the top in the darker blue are actual course content, which again, I'll say a little bit more about in a second. And then the bottom ones are sort of enablers. So ultimately, the sort of top left is where there's specialist education and training specifically focused on retrofit. We see as the sort of the biggest piece of the jigsaw. The retrofit content to existing courses, I think that was a reflection of the fact that there's a lot of general construction courses, and there's going to be a lot of people leaving those that don't really understand the sort of energy efficiency, low carbon heating systems kind of requirements. So helping those people both understand what they should and shouldn't do from an energy efficiency perspective when they're working on homes that have been retrofitted, but also help those residents understand the opportunities in the retrofit sector. And as I said, it's a significantly growing market. I think the headlines were it's about a 4-fold increase in people needed in the sort of retrofit space. So how can we encourage more people to enter the market? And that was a big part of that is through the existing content, or through the existing learners, sorry, but giving them some sort of retrofit, light touch retrofit content. And then at the bottom, the lighter blue boxes, sort of underpinning enablers, and this is at a very much at a kind of college and training provider level, but kind of looking at the facilities and equipment, looking at the training of staff, looking at the better links between employers and training providers, and then the kind of retrofit careers advice that underpins all of this and attracts new people into the industry, or encourages people to move from sort of older, more traditional construction into kind of retrofit. And then I guess just reinforcing the point that Carla made at the beginning around the sort of ecosystem approach, very much recognizing that the kind of building demand for retrofit measures, as well as all the other enablers that sort of sit within the wider retrofit industry and sector, is a key part of this. But I guess just focusing on the kind of 6 kind of skills specific elements for the purposes of today. I think a few reflections on kind of where we have and haven't made progress. I think we've made, yes, probably more progress on 4 of the 6 recommendations. So in terms of the dedicated kind of retrofit training provision, the funding from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero has allowed us to commission about 350 funded places across sort of 2 different sorts of courses. what we've called the kind of enablers, which are things like the prerequisites for some of the more sort of specialist courses, but actually from some previous sort of pilot funded work, we know that not all construction professionals have things like water regulations and therefore aren't eligible to go on to the heat pump training courses. So we kind of use those enablers partly just as a sort of stepping stone, but also, as I mentioned before, have looked to include within that some of the sort of high level kind of retrofit careers advice and guidance. So that's that might well be a sort of traditional plumber that doesn't have their water regs qualifications, offering them effectively a free water regs course, but then also using that as a hook to then have a conversation with them about whether they wanted to go on to become a heat pump installer, or similarly with the verification, inspection and testing, using that as a route into things like solar PV courses. So I guess using those kind of enabler courses as sort of almost free training that's applicable to anybody in the sector, but then using that as a way to encourage people to think about the retrofit industry as a sort of a slight as their next career step. And then similarly, we've had I guess the more obvious retrofit qualifications that you've got listed there. So insulation and building treatments, energy efficiency for domestic heating, heat pumps and solar PV as the sort of more technical retrofit qualifications, which is the sort of the bigger blue box on the previous slide. And so that's the training that's just coming to an end in the next few weeks. And then I guess similarly, I mentioned skills boot camps. So we've secured an additional Department for Education funding for just under 200 places on the courses that I've listed there. So in terms of the actual kind of core delivery of the sort of the big blue box on the previous slide, that's sort of where we've landed. Yeah, as I mentioned already, really, but we sort of added what we're calling early stage retrofit content. So things like the Retrofit Academy's Retrofit 101 course, alongside those enablers that I listed before, as I said, to just help those learners understand what the retrofit industry is and what the opportunities might be. Around staff, I guess one of the big challenges that we've found, and I'm sure this is reflected elsewhere, is that staff often don't have the sort of knowledge or the skills of the retrofit sector to actually deliver retrofit training, or particularly to scale up the provision of retrofit skills training. So we've identified and scheduled training for 15 staff, and actually this is across the 5 different colleges and training providers, and focusing on solar PV and heat pumps in the first instance, but recognizing that we'll probably need to roll that out across most of the other sort of retrofit trades going forward. And then the final one, where we've made some progress, is around just building links between employers and education providers. And yeah, as I said, this is probably where we aren't as well advanced, but we've got 2 events and aiming to have sort of certainly well into sort of 3 figures worth of kind of local businesses attending that. The first of those is actually tomorrow, but I'll be giving a shorter version of this. And we're also working with the British Association of Construction Heads, the regional chair of that, to look to develop a green construction advisory panel model for Surrey. So I guess that's, again, something to flag that British Association of Construction Heads network is starting to think about how that model can be rolled out more widely across the country, to sort of do that employer and education provider kind of linkages, to make sure that those that there's the right level of engagement there. And then the final slide, just a few sort of reflections and kind of lessons learned. I think the first thing to say is that having this kind of skills roadmap has just been really helpful for both understanding the challenge and starting to sort of build momentum and build alignment around what's needed in the retrofit skills space. So although we've sort of come a little bit top down, as I said, actually to use that then as a way to engage both colleges and businesses, it is kind of has been a key benefit of having the sort of the roadmap there. Yeah, definitely huge opportunities to kind of collaborate between colleges, and as I said, more on an informal basis around kind of sharing knowledge, staff training, and the sort of business engagement. And not again to Cara around the retrofit, the National Retrofit Hub qualifications and training map. Yeah, it's been a massive help just for the colleges to understand the different kind of courses available to kind of meet the kind of key areas. And yeah, would have been amazing if that had been available, when it would have saved us a lot of head scratching 6 or 12 months ago. And then ultimately, I guess what worked is that we've just been shortlisted for one of the Unlock Net Zero awards in a couple of months' time. So hopefully that's testament to the fact that we're doing something right, even if we're maybe sort of on the shoulders of building on the shoulders of what other people have done elsewhere. And then I think kind of what we could have done differently, or things that have maybe gone slightly less well. Yeah, I've sort of mentioned the sort of less formal involvement with businesses so far. So I won't go through that in any more detail. Yeah, so at the moment, most of the funding that we've secured is for the delivery of courses, rather than maybe some of the sort of, I guess, the more sort of, central coordination, non-delivery costs, things like facilities and equipment and staff training. So colleges are definitely aware that to get to the scale of retrofit skills training that we need, there's a requirement for investment there. And I guess similarly, thinking about the sort of wider partnerships, that historically I think we've probably underutilized things like social housing funded sort of decarbonisation projects to develop the local supply chain. A lot of those contracts have gone to businesses from outside of Surrey. So I think we've probably got an underdeveloped supply chain when those businesses are going to be asked or kind of required to sort of meet the wider retrofit demand across the county going forward. So I think those are just a bit of a summary of kind of where we've landed. And then I think just as in the sort of a final thought on that around done differently or kind of lesson learned is just around the kind of staff availability and skills. Although we've kind of got this funding for staff training, the college staff are just so busy delivering kind of the bread and butter day courses that finding time for them to go off and deliver another course has been quite challenging. So if we had a little bit of a longer lead time around the funding, we probably would have scheduled it a little bit differently to align with their sort of college CPD periods and things like that. But that's just maybe a more sort of tactical bit of learning that's quite live at the moment. So I think that's me done.